What's the shittiest thing you've ever done? Story 1. I had a friend when I was in middle school whose mom would take care of me until my mom got out of work. We both had GameCubes, except mine was a used one my parents got from a swap meet, and his was brand new, so I would take my controller and games to school so I could play with him afterward. Well, one day my GameCube stopped working. I didn't know what was wrong with it. I was 11 and didn't know about troubleshooting, lol. The next day happened to be the same day we were moving houses, and I was being transferred to a new school. I got the genius idea of taking my GameCube to school. My friend and I had the same color GameCube, so right before my mom picked me up, I sneakily switched our GameCubes. We said our goodbyes, since it was the last time I would see him, and I left. He had no way to contact me since I moved to a new city, new school, got a new house phone number, etc. So here I am, almost 15 years later, with the same GameCube I switched from my friend. I've tried looking for him on Facebook to apologize and pay him back or replace it, but no luck. To this day, I still think about it whenever I play Melee or Double Dash. Story 2. When I was in high school, there was a girl who was always mean to me. I never knew why. I don't think I had ever done anything to her, but day after day, there she was, acting the same way. So on this particular day, she was saying really rude things, and I ignored it. Then while I was standing in the quad with some of my buddies, she suddenly yelled at me, completely unprovoked, "Get out of my way!" It really made me angry. As she disappeared into a sea of students, I decided to take out my gum and toss it at her in a last-ditch effort to vent some frustration. She was probably 20 to 25 feet away, so I assumed it just fell harmlessly to the ground. About 1 or 2 minutes later, I saw her again, but something was off. She was crying and being consoled by her friend. She walked about 6 feet away from me, and I was staring, trying to figure out what happened, until I saw it. Her entire head was a massive tangle of gum and tight brown curls. For about 3 seconds, I felt bad. Then I realized that for me to make that throw, nearly blindly into a crowd of people, and have it land in the only place it could cause that level of chaos, it felt almost like destiny. Story 3. When I was around 13 years old, my grandfather passed away, and we had him cremated so his ashes could be scattered into the Great South Bay, Long Island. My aunt had come up from Florida for the funeral, and after the service, the immediate family drove with the urn to the bay. We all got out of the cars and my aunt reached for the urn, which was in a box on the middle seat. When she lifted it, the urn broke. It was one of those water-dissolving kinds. My grandfather's ashes spilled all over the seat and my aunt. Being 13 and always the kind of kid who joked around when someone tripped or did something clumsy, I instinctively shouted, "Ha, nice job." The moment I realized what I had just said, I stood frozen with my hand over my mouth as my aunt turned to me, eyes full of tears and her father's ashes on her hands. Story 4. I still feel absolutely terrible about this, even though it happened over 10 years ago. Whenever I went out with this one guy from work, Jake, something bad always happened. This was the worst incident by far. It was a Friday afternoon and I wanted a beer. Nobody else was interested except for Jake, so we ended up at a local pub together. After a couple of hours of drinking, we were both very drunk. Eventually, we both needed to use the restroom, so we went together and ended up at side-by-side urinals. Jake, in his infinite wisdom, decided it would be hilarious to aim at me. He turned and yelled, "Hey!" and then sent a stream of urine all over my fabric-toed shoes. Jake thought it was hilarious. I found it disgusting. He quickly ran off while I finished up and quietly planned my revenge. As I turned to leave, I saw what I thought was Jake near the sinks, bent over. Without thinking, I ran up and kicked him hard, right in the middle of his backside with my soaked shoe. It was a direct hit. The revenge felt oddly perfect. I laughed and patted Jake on the back until I realized it wasn't him. My heart dropped. It was an older man wearing the same color clothes, struggling to fasten his belt. I panicked and immediately began apologizing, asking if he was okay and trying to explain. He just grunted and waved me off, clearly not interested in hearing it. Outside the restroom, Jake was still laughing about the shoe incident until he saw my expression. We returned to the table, and I told him what had happened. We were both stunned. After a few minutes of guilty silence, we decided to make it right by finding the man and offering to cover his drinks for the night. We searched the pub for over an hour, but he was gone. I still feel awful about it and haven't gone drinking with Jake since. Story 5. Okay, good question. Things just got real. I was at the park with my wife and my 4-year-old daughter. We went with another couple and their 4-year-old son. The kids were both riding scooters. The little boy had been riding his scooter for a long time and used it a lot, so he was very confident with his scooter skills, but my daughter had just gotten her scooter a few days earlier and was nervous riding it. The little boy thought it was funny to ride his scooter fast and then hit the brakes and gently bump into the back of my daughter's scooter. He did this 3 times and my daughter got more upset each time he did it. Each time I told him not to do it in a progressively stern voice, but he kept doing it. After the 3rd time, I looked him dead in the eyes and told him that if he did it again, he would be sorry. The little kid backs up 20 feet and starts coming full speed at the back of my daughter's scooter. My parental instinct kicks in, and I put my foot firmly down 1.5 feet behind my daughter's scooter, thinking this would scare the kid into veering away. But he didn't have time, and he tried to stop in a panic. His timing to slow down and gently crash into my daughter's scooter was thrown off by my foot, causing the 4-year-old to fall hard on the concrete path. He skinned both his hands and both his knees and loudly yelled out, "What are you doing?" I instantly felt bad. Plus, some people in the park had missed the initial scooter bumping and just saw me tripping a 4-year-old kid, so I felt embarrassed. A few minutes later, after calming the kid down, both his parents laughed and thanked me for teaching their kid a lesson because he had been misbehaving. Story 6. I tried to break up with my high school sweetheart, who I had been dating for 6 years at the time, on the same day as our anniversary, which I completely forgot about. I didn't have the heart to do it, so I took her out to dinner and did it the next weekend instead. I have a bad memory for dates, and she never dropped any hints, but that relationship had gone on long enough, and I was just losing interest. I wanted to get out and explore new things, but she wanted to get married and settle down. It doesn't end there. Like 2 or 3 years later, I looked her up to see how she was doing, hoping we could reconnect and be friends. I knew it devastated her and always felt bad, so I wanted to apologize and make things right at least. Turns out she had been holding a candle the entire time, and literally nothing had changed. She hadn't moved on, and so she instantly thought we were getting back together, and I had to break it to her again that I didn't want that anymore. I was just trying to say my piece and maybe be friends. Felt horrible for even ever attempting to apologize after that. Story 7. My time to shine. So when I was a sophomore in high school, we had a career day. We go room to room and observe different presentations by people in various job fields. So I ended up going to the physical therapy presentation. This is where things went sideways. So this lady is talking about all the work she does at her facility, and I'm not really paying attention. Then she puts on a video of one of the people she's helped at her center. Video starts, and it's a guy with no arms or legs, just nubs. He kind of waffles out, then Eye of the Tiger by Survivor starts playing. I'm like, no way, as this guy literally starts doing the most unbelievable things. He's hitting a speed bag with his head, doing barrel rolls, jumping through rings of fire and more, and then I just lose it. I'm crying laughing in a crowded room full of peers, and I'm the only one. I couldn't help it. I just could not stop laughing. When the presentation was over, I was mortified. People told me all week I was awful, I was heartless, etc. That career day haunts me to this day. Story 8. I was dating this guy in high school who ended up being really abusive. When I broke up with him, he started stalking me. He'd show up at my workplaces and even at my home in the middle of the night, just hanging around outside of my window and things like that. I confronted him at school and told him that he needed to leave me alone. He did not comply. He kept following me to class and left notes. Lots of, "I'm never going to leave you," and "I'll hurt myself if you don't come back to me" kinds of things. I was at my wit's end. I ended up moving a knife that he kept in his car into a visible spot. I told the school police officer that he was stalking me, true, and was threatening to hurt me, not true, with the knife in his car, true. I took the officer out to see the knife, which was sitting on the passenger seat of the car. Got my ex suspended from school for a majority of the year, and he finally left me alone. Story 9. I've been saving this story for a while. Years ago, I traveled with some friends to a nearby city to hang out with people I didn't know for a party. I ended up pretty bored because everyone took acid, and I didn't want to do that with a bunch of strangers. I sat around and had a few beers. Most people were outside by a fire. A girl wandered in who I hadn't seen yet. She wasn't very friendly. Overweight, goth, had a bad attitude. Just miserable. But she wasn't on acid, and her making fun of the others was about the most entertaining thing happening, so we chatted for a while. It eventually got pretty late, and my friends and I were going to head out soon. They were all still playing and running around outside. She turned to me and said that, if I wanted, we could go upstairs and she'd take care of me. I was a young guy with a one-track mind, and this seemed like the highlight of the weekend. So I said, sure. We went upstairs, did the deed, and she let me finish on her goth, makeup-melted face. Kind girl. I walked back downstairs and my friends came in from outside asking if we could leave. Yup. Before the goth girl got downstairs from cleaning up, we were gone. The next day I got a call. Did you hook up with that goth girl last night? I acted surprised and said no. Yeah, I didn't think so. She was crying and saying you left without even saying goodbye. What? No way. I know, she lies a lot. This is like the third time she said something like this. None of her friends are going to talk to her anymore. Yeah. Not only did I leave without saying goodbye, not only did I deny it happened, but two other guys had already done the same thing to her, and now her friends weren't talking to her anymore because they didn't believe her. Definitely one of the worst things I've done. I wish I could find that goth girl, let her get even with me, and leave without saying goodbye. Story 10. Long version, she got into a relationship for the first time in years with someone who didn't deserve her. She fell madly in love and ignored the fact that he was involved in all sorts of criminal activities, including drugs and weapons. She introduced him to me and a few other friends, and everyone told her he was bad news and that she should think carefully about the relationship. We were very close. We used to talk daily and spent a lot of time together until she began dating him. After they got together, I only saw her 3 times. Twice he was there with us, behaving aggressively and possessively. I told her I cared about her and that if she ever needed me, I'd be there. But I couldn't risk my own well-being or that of my girlfriend by being around someone involved in crime. Fast forward 4 months, I ran into her randomly after hearing nothing for that whole time. She looked great, happy and healthy, so I assumed her relationship was going well. Nope. The guy turned out to be abusive, alcoholic, and addicted to drugs. He had held her captive for months, took her phone, made her delete her Facebook, and isolated her completely. She finally dumped him a week before I saw her, which was the only reason she was out again. She filed a restraining order, and now the police are involved. I still feel bad for not being there, but I tried to support her as much as I could. We all warned her, but she wouldn't listen. Story 11. I reported my boss to the IRS. I was 20, working in a small, family-owned restaurant. I had been there about a year and a half. I was trying to afford community college, but because I was considered out of state, it was a lot more expensive. I had lived in that state for almost 2 years, but to qualify for in-state tuition, the school needed tax returns showing I supported myself without parental help. Only problem, my W-2 showed about 1/10 of what I actually made because we were all being paid under the table. So I called my parents' accountant. They filed my taxes using the full income based on my bank records, which still wasn't much. This was over 10 years ago in a small town. About 2 months later, the IRS showed up and shut the place down. Turns out the amount I listed as my income was higher than what the owners claimed as revenue. That raised a red flag. The IRS opened an investigation and discovered the owners had either falsified or completely failed to file business taxes for around 12 years. I didn't mean to ruin them. I just wanted affordable tuition. I do believe they would have been caught eventually. I just sped up the process. Story 12. Not on the top of my list, but this one was a win. When I was a freshman in high school, my brother and I had just gotten an Xbox 360 for Christmas, and Halo 3 was my prized possession. Since I had to share the Xbox with him, I would take it into my room at night and play Halo almost all night on school nights. One morning, sleep-deprived and in a bad mood, we walked to the bus stop, which was actually at an elementary school, where my brother, his friend, and I found some kid calling us fat, mostly my brother and his friend. I could see them getting visibly upset, and me being tired and irritable, I told the kid to back off. What does this kid do? He cups my chest and jiggles it while saying something snarky. I completely lost it and went into a blackout rage. I started fighting the kid and yelling every curse word I could think of at him while doing it. This went on for what felt like a minute or two until the principal of the elementary school, with her second grade class, came and broke up the fight. She was shocked to find me yelling and hitting a smaller kid while cursing like crazy. When I got to school, I felt awful, not just because of the fight, but because I knew I was in big trouble and was embarrassed for using that kind of language in front of small children. I was immediately called to the principal's office and told I would be suspended from school for 3 days. It was the first time I had ever been in trouble that I couldn't talk my way out of. I just sat there in silence waiting to be picked up, not speaking or making eye contact with anyone. The only thing I remember was the sound of the clock ticking until my mom arrived. She didn't speak to me in the car, and when I got home, I laid in bed silently for an hour until she finally asked what I was doing. I told her I was punishing myself, and she said, "Why? You stood up to a bully. Go do whatever you want. I'm going to pick up lunch for us." I don't think my parents had ever been so proud of me. Story 13. Oh God, okay. When I was like 13 or 14, I was babysitting my little brother who was maybe 6 years old. He had a minor cold at the time, just a cough and runny nose. After my parents left, I went outside to smoke. I came back in and started playing this game with my brother, where we chased each other around the house, running circles around the dining room table. He started coughing because of the cold, and I suddenly got super paranoid and thought he was dying. I panicked, thinking he couldn't breathe and was about to choke. I ended up calling 911. He was totally confused and scared. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was just sitting on the couch, completely fine. When my parents got home, I told them I called 911 because I thought my brother was having trouble breathing and was worried. It sounded serious. They were glad I had called, but I was terrified that I had traumatized him. I still remember the look on his face when I said, "OMG, I have to call 911. His eyes got all wide and he was like, "No, please don't." When he got older and went through his own phase of experimenting, I told him the truth, that I was totally paranoid. He thought it was hilarious. Worst sister ever. Story 14. When I was 15, I was at a friend's, I'll call her Amy, house, waiting for her to get ready to go out. While I waited, I started snooping through her room. I ended up finding her diary, and instead of putting it away, I read it. I found out she had slept with a guy she barely knew, who just happened to be a close friend of another girl I was friends with. I'll call her Laura. I wasn't sure if the story was real or just something she had made up. I wanted to know if it was true, but I didn't want to admit to Amy that I had read her diary. So I told Laura about it, and we called the guy. Instead of asking him directly, we told him Amy was pregnant and had said the baby was his. We expected him to laugh it off and not believe us. But apparently the story was true, because he freaked out, hung up the phone, and immediately told his mom. We didn't let him believe Amy was pregnant for long, but the damage was done. He was furious. His mom was furious. We felt so guilty that we told Amy what we had done, and she was furious and embarrassed. Eventually, we were all kind of friends again, but I don't think she ever really forgave us. I never found out for sure because later that year, Amy was killed in a car accident. That was over 20 years ago, and I still haven't forgiven myself for what we did. Story 15. This happened about a year ago. I stole pictures of a beautiful girl online and made a fake Plenty of Fish account with a fake name and details. I was just messing around, having fun chatting with guys in my area. I started talking to this one guy all day and night over the course of about 3 days. He fell head over heels for my fake persona. During that time, he mentioned he was a new professor at a school I had graduated from. Obviously, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to blow my cover. Around 3 days in, he sent a message that said something like, "I can't wait to meet you in person. I'm just so afraid you won't like me once you meet me." It crushed me. This guy was so excited to meet a girl who didn't exist. I didn't say anything. I just deleted all the photos and deleted the account. A few days later, I logged into my old school email. It's my spam account now, where I send promotions and stuff. I was looking for a promo code for a sale when I saw an email that had been sent to the entire university. It was about a memorial service for the professor I had been chatting with. Near the end of the email was a link to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and other resources. He had taken his own life. I think about it every day. Story 16. When I was in college, I went to a party that had a keg. I was in the basement with people I didn't know, and there were these two girls. Eventually, realizing that my boyish charm was getting me nowhere, The conversation died and the girl's attention drifted elsewhere. Because I was 19 and had no ability to hold my liquor, I leaned on the desk to steady myself and knocked over a lava lamp. No one seemed to notice, so I casually walked away. Sometime later, one of the hosts came up to the three of us since he'd seen us all talking earlier. He said something like, "Look, I don't know who broke it, but if you're drunk enough to break stuff, you probably need to go home." The girls began protesting, saying it wasn't them, but we were still herded toward the door. I pulled the host aside and told him I didn't know who broke the lamp, but if he needed help replacing it, I could pitch in. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Nah, you're good, man. I'm pretty sure it wasn't you. I think it was the heavier girl. Just hang back and grab another beer." So I did. I let them take the fall and didn't replace the lava lamp. Story 17. I was broken up with my girlfriend, but we were still living together while both of us were in the process of moving out. We weren't spending much time there. I was 24 and in my last year of college. It had taken a while because I worked and paid my own way. I was employed at a local pet store and not in a good place mentally. During that time, I started seeing a younger coworker. One night, we spent time together at my friend's place. The next morning, she left early, and I hung out there all day drinking and playing video games. That night, I went back to my apartment, and my ex was there, also drinking. She started apologizing for how things had gone and for wanting to break up. I think it was mostly because she couldn't stand seeing me move on so quickly. We ended up getting physically close again. The next morning, I realized something. I had never showered between that night and what happened later with my ex. Story 18. I worked for a large telecom company in a smaller city. It was awesome. I was one of the few men in the office, which was mostly filled with middle-aged and older women. I was in my early 20s, so I was the baby of the office. Everyone loved me. Everyone except this one coworker, we'll call her Stacy. I don't know if she was just mean-spirited or just didn't like me. She did petty things like taking my Post-its or yanking my headset when I was in the middle of a call. She really got on my nerves. I vowed that one day I'd get back at her for everything. Well, shortly after September 11th, they announced that our office would be closing. We had the option to either transfer to one of two larger cities or take severance pay and move on. Stacy chose to transfer. I took the separation. On the last day of work, most people were just visiting, exchanging numbers and saying their goodbyes. Stacy worked in the same hall of cubicles as I did, so when our manager came by and told us there was free lunch in the break room, Stacy bolted to get herself a sandwich. Here was my chance. I knew she wouldn't have locked her computer in a rush. Big mistake. Our computers were time-stamped with our IDs to track activity. As the last of our coworkers headed to the break room, I quietly slipped into Stacy's chair and looked up 3 phone accounts. My favorite high school teachers, my best friend's dorm phone, and my old roommate's apartment. I waived 3 months of charges from all their bills. I went back to my desk unnoticed. Everyone returned with plates of food, none the wiser. I smiled quietly. As customer service reps, we couldn't waive charges without a solid reason. If we didn't provide one, management would investigate. My reason? Adjust to satisfy, which is only good for 1 month's charge at best. I knew she'd be questioned, but I didn't expect what came next. Months passed. Friends got bills with no balance. Life moved on. Then I heard from a former coworker that Stacy had been questioned by her new manager about those adjustments. She had no idea what they were talking about, but it didn't matter. They fired her on the spot. Story 19. I pretended that I got in a car accident on my way to do an errand for my boss so I could get the rest of the week off work. I was 19, and it was my first corporate job, a summer internship. But it wasn't anything like what they promised. I was getting paid, but I wasn't learning what I hoped to, and I was absolutely miserable. One day, my boss asked me to deliver some advertising materials to other local construction businesses. I hated doing it, so instead, I just drove home. When my boss called to ask where I was, I told him I'd been in a car accident and had to get my car towed. He gave me the rest of the week off. The next week, I drove my mom's car to work so he wouldn't suspect anything. He even took me out to lunch and was one of the nicest people I've ever worked for. Probably the best boss I've had. But I honestly hated that job so much. Story 20. This is probably the most horrible thing I've ever done. I've never told anyone. I still cry when I think about it, because I'm an animal lover and would never do anything like this on purpose. When I was 6, we lived on a farm and had a lot of cats. All 4 of our female cats got pregnant at the same time, and each had 6 kittens. That gave us 24 kittens, 4 females, and 2 males. Usually our cats stayed inside, but with that many, we had to move them to the barn. My dad set up space heaters and beds with blankets. It was warm in there, except near the door. Sometimes the mom cats would try to bring the kittens into the house. I knew we weren't allowed to let them in because we'd have to bring in the whole litter. So when a mom cat brought one to my window, I would quietly pick it up, get on my bike, and take it back to the barn, about a 3-minute ride. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard meowing outside my window. A mom cat had brought a kitten. My dad was sleeping, and I didn't want to wake him, so I got on my bike and rode the kitten back. But I was terrified of the dark and didn't want to go all the way inside the barn. So I left her by the door, assuming the mom would come get her. The next morning, I went to check on the kittens as usual. When I opened the barn door, I found the kitten. She had died. She froze during the night. I was devastated. I didn't go to school for 2 days because I couldn't stop crying. Story 21. I can't believe I'm going to write this. We used to knock out horseflies and build wings on them using toothpicks and tracing paper. One day I decided I wanted to try it with a lizard. To knock it out, I thought I'd hit it with a pressure blast from my paintball gun by placing the barrel near its head and firing. I figured it wouldn't injure the lizard and would be effective. It didn't work. I thought the pressure just dissipated too quickly, so I tried again, this time with the lizard inside the barrel. When I fired, the lizard flopped out of the barrel and looked at me, still conscious. So I figured I'd use the method we used for flies. I put paint thinner in a small airtight container and left it in the sun so it would vaporize. I put the lizard in for 5 minutes. When I opened the container, the lizard was awake but had lost all its skin and scales. I was horrified. I knew it wouldn't survive and felt I had to end its suffering. I threw it into our wood stove. I thought it would die quickly and be cremated. It didn't. It ran around inside on fire for about 30 seconds while I watched. To this day, it's one of only 3 things I regret deeply, and the only thing I've ever done that made me vomit afterward. I'm so sorry, little lizard. Story 22. This is going to be awful, but you asked. In high school, there was a girl who really liked me. A lot. She wasn't very popular and could be a little annoying. I couldn't stand the attention. All of my friends teased me about it. She even joined the track team because I was on it. I had just reached a breaking point. One day during lunch, I was eating and chatting with friends when she came over to our table and started talking. Out of nowhere, I stood up and said, "Hey guys, watch me walk around the world in 5 seconds." Then I walked around her and pretended I was out of breath. She ran out of the cafeteria. She must not have told anyone because I never got in trouble. My friends thought it was hilarious. Story 23. My mom married a self-centered, insecure man. This happened when I was around 17, after they had been married for several years. He constantly made her feel invisible, never laughed at her jokes, and never made her feel appreciated. One weekend, she asked if anyone wanted to go to the mall with her. Everyone wanted to stay home and rest, so she went alone. A few hours later, she came back. She had gotten a makeover at one of the mall's cosmetics counters. She was excited to show off her new look, but it looked awful. She normally didn't wear makeup, and this stuff was caked on poorly. I could tell she had bought some of it too. She walked in and asked what we thought. No one said anything. There were at least 4 of us in the house. We just looked at her, then looked away. After a minute, she went into the bathroom and washed it off. She and my stepdad died in a car accident not long after. It's a moment I wish I could go back to, not to tell her it looked good, but to tell her she was beautiful and that she mattered. That moment was her reaching out, hoping someone would see her. I wish I had said something. Story 24. During my senior year of college, I was taking 27 credits to graduate on time. I had done all of the work and hadn't fallen behind, so I'm still unsure why I did this. But 1 month before graduation, I plagiarized a paper from the internet for one of my electives. You know those paper mills? I forgot to rewrite one sentence in the paper, and of course I got caught. When I went in front of the Academic Integrity Committee, I lied and got away with it. I was suspended for a semester, but I still walked at graduation and took a class from an online college to finish in the fall. It haunts me because in 4 years up until that point, I never once cheated, took the easy way out, or slacked off. And in my last month of school, I threw that all away. For what? I was passing all of my 9 classes, including the English elective, up to that point. I still don't know why I did it. It keeps me up at night knowing I'm a fraud with a degree, who doesn't deserve his job or any of the nice things I have, because deep down, I feel like a fraud and a liar. Story 25. I was in 8th grade and sat at the back of the bus. A 7th grader always tried to sit near us and we'd tease him because only 8th graders could sit in the back. After months of this strange rivalry, there was a day when I was sitting in the back and saw a friend outside. I got up to leave the bus briefly since there was still time before it left. The 7th grader was walking toward the back holding a big plastic bag carefully in his arms. As I walked past him, I intentionally slammed into him. The plastic bag made a crunching sound and he cried out in despair. I went outside and talked to my friend. When I returned to the bus, he was sitting near the front, quietly sobbing. The bag was open and inside was a ruined gingerbread house lying in pieces on his lap. I didn't say anything. I walked past him and sat in the back, pretending it didn't happen. He glared at me through teary eyes. He cried for the whole 15-minute ride and never sat in the back again. Story 26. I went to an herb dispensary and was walking up to the door after parking. As I approached, a tough-looking guy came around the corner quickly, put his arm in front of me at the door to block me, and just looked at me while letting himself in. I stepped back and let him go first to get checked by security. As he was being searched, he dropped something, a folded-up piece of paper. I let him know he had dropped it, and he immediately raised his voice and said, "Could you step back, please? What the heck?" and started making jokes to the security guard about me. Whatever. I stepped back. He went inside. I picked up the paper but didn't check it. Once I got in, I noticed him talking to a bud tender and still looking at me and laughing. I continued minding my business. I noticed him checking his wallet and pockets. He must not have heard me earlier. I left the shop, then checked the paper I picked up. It contained $120. I thought about driving back to return it, but honestly, he seemed like such a jerk, and I was already home. Story 27. This is my friend's story, but it's too good not to share. He went with his brother to see the movie Sucker Punch. He was around 16 at the time, and his brother was a few years older. His brother went to get popcorn, and my friend came up with the genius idea to surprise him. He crouched near a railing along the walkway, and when he saw someone approaching in the dark theater, he wound up and delivered a full-force slap directly to what he thought were his brother's lower regions. The person yelled in pain and dropped to the ground, but it wasn't his brother. It was a complete stranger. My friend panicked, ran to his seat, and prayed the man hadn't seen his face. When his brother came back, he told him what happened, and they both struggled not to laugh as the injured man sat moaning in pain in the row in front of them for the rest of the movie. That could have been the end, but it gets better. The next week, their local newspaper published a column by the editor describing how he had gone to see a film called Sucker Punch and was physically assaulted by an unknown assailant. My friend still has the article framed in his house. Story 28. A bit late to share, but I need to get this off my chest. My best friend took me out for a pre-bachelor party. We had about 4 liters of beer before even making it to the club. We stopped to get cash, and I ran into a convenience store to grab rum and Coke, thinking I had plenty of time to drink some before we arrived. What I didn't realize was that the club was just around the corner. Not wanting to pay $10 per drink, I decided to chug the rum and chase it with a little Coke. Fast forward past the club, we're heading home, and I get thirsty. I remember there's some Coke left, grab it, and chug it. It had been sitting in the car and was warm. That didn't go down well. The warm foam triggered my stomach, and I threw up. In his car, which he had just bought 3 days earlier. It was projectile vomit straight into the air vents. Once I caught a whiff of it, I threw up again. On the seats, the carpet, the console. I was a complete mess. We got back to his house, and I tried to clean it in my drunken state, but just ended up grinding it deeper into the upholstery. Later that night, I woke up with stomach issues and couldn't make it to the bathroom, so I used his office trash can. It was awful. I never told him. I just cleaned it up and hoped he'd never find out. I'm a terrible friend, and I'm ashamed of myself. Story 29. When I was in 7th grade, there was this kid I didn't like at all. We had the 5th class of the day together, and I knew exactly where he sat in that class every day. I didn't see him until that class, and we also had the last 2 classes of the day together. The fifth class was right before lunch, and a little after lunch had ended, a friend of mine who also didn't like the kid snuck into the classroom with me and stood at the door to keep watch for any teachers while I filled the kid's seat with glue. The plan was for his khaki school pants to rip underneath him as he got up from his chair. We all returned from lunch. The plan was executed perfectly, except for one major issue. The kid I didn't like didn't come to school that day. A new kid sat in his seat on his first day. The whole time I was thinking, please let the glue have dried before he sat down. The teacher then announced we had a new student and asked him to introduce himself in front of the class. I could hear the sound of fabric tearing as he stood up. This poor kid's khaki pants ripped open along the entire left side, exposing his underwear as he stood near his desk. The entire class burst out laughing and pointing. The kid looked like he was on the verge of tears. Someone yelled, "Bro, I see a brown stain," and the class laughed even harder. I felt awful. I never confessed to the teacher or principal, even though they suspected me because I was known as a class clown. But I did try to make it right. I spent some of my summer money to buy that kid a new pair of pants. It was the least I could do after what I had done. He never found out it was me. Story 30. In fifth grade, during the early 1980s, we used to chase a little girl who had recently immigrated to the US from Russia. During recess, we'd chase her across the big football field and corner her against the chain-link fence, then yell, "Commie," at her. It must have been terrifying. I didn't personally dislike her. I didn't hate her. I didn't even really understand what the word commie meant at the time. But I joined in with the mob. A couple of girls tried to stop us, but the rest of us continued. She wasn't physically harmed, at least not that I remember. But that doesn't matter. What we did was cruel, and I wish someone had stepped in and disciplined us for it. I never saw her again after that first week. My guess is her parents pulled her from the school. I'm truly sorry wherever you are now. You'd probably be in your 40s today. I hope life has been kind to you. I don't expect your forgiveness. We didn't deserve it. What we did was terrible. In my more self-forgiving moments, I think about our second grade teacher. She used to wear flip-flops and sing while playing the guitar, but she also told us stories about the communist threat and how they'd come to harm us if we let them. It was the final decade of the Cold War. We just didn't know that yet. I'm sure the fear and indoctrination played a role in how we acted. But even then, I knew it was wrong. I still think of her often. I hope she lived a good life. Story 31. When I was in 7th grade, I got an in-school suspension for tripping multiple kids at recess, and I ended up hurting one of them. The day of my in-school suspension, I had a big history exam that everyone was freaking out about. But instead of taking it with the rest of the class, I had to sit in the vice principal's office. Being young and not very smart, I was around 13 or 14, I pulled out my history book during the test and started looking up the answers right in front of the VP. I kept checking to see if she noticed, but she didn't say anything. I came across a difficult question I couldn't find in the book. So, being the dumb kid I was, I actually asked the VP to help me look for the answer. So there we were, flipping through the book together, trying to find the last answer to my test. And sure enough, the VP found the answer and gave it to me. Fast forward to the day the exams were returned. And what do you know? I got a 100%. It turned out to be the highest grade in the class, and my teacher was really impressed. I remember looking around at everyone's faces and how annoyed they were that I was the only one to get a perfect score. I still get a good laugh about it to this day. Story 32. My ex-business partner embezzled so much money from our company that it failed. Big time. When I discovered what he had done, I hid a video camera in the office and confronted him. Instead of answering my questions, he went off on a 10-minute rant about how much he hated people with disabilities. I'm physically disabled, and said we should all be put down for the good of society. After he stormed out, I retrieved the video. It was perfect, undeniable proof that he had embezzled the money, along with his incredibly offensive comments. I knew that being an IT guy like me, he'd be applying to tech recruiters and major companies in the area. So I sent a link to the video to every major recruiting manager I could find, and to nearly every software, support, and IT company around. My wife at the time still had him added on Facebook, and whenever he posted asking for prayers about landing a job at some company, she'd tell me, and I'd send the video to that company. Despite having a 4-year degree and multiple expensive certifications, He now works as a manager at a local fast food place. He hasn't tried applying anywhere in years. I think I'm probably going to leave him alone now. Story 33. There was a girl in my grade who used crutches because she couldn't walk without them. I remember having class with her in middle school, and she seemed nice. By senior year, she wanted to ask someone to prom, or maybe it was one of those dances where girls ask the guys. Anyway, I believe she tried to ask someone using a note hidden in a pack of gum. She offered him the gum, but he knew what was happening and turned it down. I heard she tried asking a few others, but they all dodged it. At lunch one day, a friend of mine, who was also friends with her, was texting her and reading the messages out loud to our table. She was texting him about who she wanted to ask. I suggested he recommend one of our friends, who was nice but a bit socially awkward. We were all kind of outcasts, and I thought it might be a good match. She immediately rejected the idea, saying she didn't want to because he was weird. Later that day, I had to go to the library to grab something I had left behind. The library was connected to the main school building by a bridge hallway that went over the road. As I was heading to the library, I saw her coming from the other direction in the hallway. That's when I realized I was probably next on her list. I turned around and sprinted down the hallway past her, pretending I was late for class, grabbed my stuff, and then ran back the other way. I saw that she had changed direction and was now heading toward the library, so I sprinted past her again, carrying all my books and avoiding eye contact. I also ignored her messages on Facebook afterward. I feel a little bad about the way I handled it, but hopefully she never figured out what I was doing. Story 34. Okay, I can contribute here. One day after school in 9th grade, I skateboarded over to the park on my way home to play basketball with some other kids from school. We had all left our bags and stuff by the playground while we played ball about 20 meters away on the court. As it got late, I realized I had to get home, so I left the game and went to grab my stuff. I picked up my bag and noticed a little kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, had taken my skateboard and was playing with it in the sand. I walked over and said, "Hey, little man, that's my board and I have to go. Can I have it back?" He responded, "No, this is my board, finders keepers." I shrugged and went to grab it from him, but he swung the board and hit me in the shin. I immediately thought, I can't hit this little kid, but I definitely have to get my board back. So I grabbed a handful of sand, thinking, I'll toss it near him, and he'll drop the board for a second so I can grab it and leave. For some reason, and I still don't know exactly how it happened, I might have misjudged the distance, or maybe he moved as I bent down. But I ended up full-on slapping this kid hard with a handful of sand, and he went down like a sack of crying potatoes. I grabbed my board and went home for dinner. Later that evening, I returned to the court to keep playing, and found out there were 4 or 5 large family members of the kid combing the neighborhood looking for a teenager matching my description. Needless to say, I went right back home, fearing for my life. Story 35. During my sophomore year of high school, I had English with the teacher everyone said was the worst in the school, but I already knew how to write essays, and that's all we did in the class. I could write a 4-page paper in about an hour. Most students took the full 2-week period to finish theirs, and they often scored worse than me. I never bragged about my grades, but I was proud that my essays were often used as examples in class. The teacher would photocopy my work with his markings and hand it out to show what a solid essay looked like. Well, this one guy in class started picking on me. He didn't just think I was a teacher's pet. He said I looked like the teacher so much, I could have been his son. Looking back, he wasn't wrong. For a full semester, I heard his snide voice from the back of the room. "Mr. Allen's son." I put up with it because the previous summer, this guy's dad had passed away from cancer. But like anyone, I had my limit. During the semester exam, the last one before winter break, I finished early. It was another essay, handwritten this time. I handed it in and the teacher said, "Fantastic, I can't wait to read what you've written. Have a good break." Right as I was about to walk out the door, I heard it again. "Mr. Allen's son." I stopped, turned around, looked him straight in the eye, and in the most monotone voice I could manage, I said, "At least that means I have a dad." Then I walked out. As I headed down the hallway, I could hear the chaos erupt behind me. The most satisfying comment came from one of his buddies who said, "Holy crap, dude, he just destroyed you." He never spoke to me again. Story 36. This isn't the worst thing I've ever done, but it's pretty funny and fits in with a few other stories I've seen here. I was around 16 or 17 and dating my first girlfriend in high school. She was a grade below me and took dance. She was about 5 feet 3 inches, and I was about 5 feet 9 inches at the time. One day we were hanging out at my house and she said, "I bet I can kick over your head." She tried and she did it with a lot of grace. I replied, "Okay, let me try. You're quite a bit shorter than me, so it should be easy." Now I am not flexible. I kicked up with all my might, trying to reach as high as I could, and ended up kicking her right across the face. She hit the floor head first and was knocked unconscious. I screamed for my mom, who rushed in after hearing the panic in my voice. I tried to explain what happened, but she couldn't understand me at first. She tapped my girlfriend's face a few times, and eventually she came to. Afterward, we called her parents to tell them what happened and ask what they wanted to do. Being a teenage guy who just accidentally knocked his girlfriend out cold, I thought they were going to kill me, or maybe even press charges. But instead, they just laughed. They teased us about it for years while we dated, even after we graduated. I still work part-time for her mom while I'm in college, and we all still laugh about it. Cool family. Story 37. I used to work for Ticketmaster a long time ago. One day while I was working, I got a call from a woman who was being extremely rude because whoever she spoke to before had apparently hung up on her. She wanted tickets to a Disney on Ice show coming to her town in a few weeks. She needed around 8 tickets, so it was probably for a group with a lot of kids. She kept trying to use coupon codes that didn't exist and got more furious every time I told her they weren't valid. She called me an idiot and accused me of trying to scam her. After getting insulted repeatedly, I decided to be just as petty back. I pretended to process her ticket order, took down her credit card info, and gave her a fake confirmation number to present at the box office when she arrived for the show. Looking back, that's probably the worst thing I've done. I still feel bad thinking about it. She likely showed up with a group of excited children, only to find out they had no tickets to see Mickey Mouse skate across the ice. Story 38. When I was newly married, we were living in an apartment. Life was good. We even had a little garden we tended together. We had a low-hanging plant, and a bird built a nest in it and laid some eggs. We enjoyed watching the mama bird take care of them. One day, a couple of the eggs hatched, while a few remained unhatched. The next day, I found what I thought was the mama bird dead on the ground nearby. The little featherless, blind hatchlings were in the nest, wriggling around, waiting to be fed. I figured they would starve or be eaten, so I decided to do the humane thing. I got a shovel, dumped the babies and eggs on the ground, and ended their suffering quickly. Bits of baby bird and egg yolk were all over the walkway. As I went to get the hose to clean up, guess who showed up? The mama bird, alive, chirping, and hopping around the empty nest looking for her babies. Turns out I must have mistaken some other bird for her. I still feel terrible about it. Story 39. I once tricked a stranger into drinking something she really shouldn't have. Years ago, during a big St. Patrick's Day celebration on spring break, the streets were packed shoulder to shoulder in the bar district. I really needed to use the bathroom, but the lines were insanely long, and the crowds made it nearly impossible to move. So my friends made a circle around me, and I discreetly relieved myself into one of our empty beer cups. It didn't smell or look all that different from actual beer, just a little warm and frothy. For reasons even I didn't fully understand at the time, I decided to carry it with me. A few minutes later, we were pushing through the crowd when a group of girls passed us going the other way. One of them had a flashy drink with glowing straws and shamrock decorations. We made eye contact and I asked, "What are you drinking?" She gave me an over-the-top name and offered me a sip. I took a sip, then offered her my drink in return. She took a big gulp. Immediately, she spit it out and said, "Ew, it's warm." I replied, "Yeah, that's how the Irish drink it," as we were pushed in opposite directions and never saw each other again. I kept that cup for a few more hours. Later, while stumbling down an alley, someone tried to sell me weed. I told him I didn't smoke and that I was too drunk to carry this warm beer anymore. I sold it to him for $1 and quickly left. Story 40. When I was about 10 and my brother was 6, we were really into medieval and fantasy games and movies. When we played outside, we'd do dumb things like pretend to be throwing axemen from the Franks in Age of Empires 2, basically throwing wooden hockey sticks horizontally at each other. One day, we found some really old wooden baseball bats in the garage. They were bats my dad had used when he was growing up and were super heavy, especially for my little brother. Naturally, we immediately broke into a great sword battle using the bats. I always went easy on him, given our age difference, so he mostly swung while I parried with my heavier bat. At one point, he threw an overhead swing with decent force, for a 6-year-old, aiming right at my chest. I got my bat up just in time to block it, but when our bats collided, some of that force must have transferred back to his. I still remember it like it was yesterday. The bats collided, and because he was much smaller and couldn't control the recoil, his bat flew back and hit him square in the forehead. He immediately started screaming. My dad ran out of the front door, only to find my brother rolling around on the grass, clutching his head, and me standing over him holding a baseball bat, trying to help. I got the belt before my brother had even calmed down enough to explain what happened. Story 41. This is honestly one of the worst things I've ever done. I still feel like a bad person because of it. When I was in 7th grade, I used to walk to school with my friend. There was a kid named Austin who lived up the street and rode his bike to school. He was a little chubby and not very popular. I don't know if that influenced what I did or if it was just selfish laziness. One day while we were walking to school, I saw out of the corner of my eye a bike crash down the hill. Someone had wiped out badly. Somehow it didn't register to either of us that we should check on the person, or even realize it was Austin. As we turned the corner, my friend said, "Hey, what's that sound?" I stopped and listened. It was very soft sobbing. Then it hit me. Holy crap, that was a bike crash. That was Austin, and we needed to go help him. But then I thought, yeah, but I also have a test. So I turned to my friend and said, "It's probably nothing." And we kept walking. Later, I found out Austin's crash was bad. Really bad. He had to get facial reconstruction surgery and have his teeth completely redone. Apparently, he had to hobble around bleeding, ringing doorbells until someone finally answered and called 911. He never found out I had walked by and ignored him. Some other kids seemed to know, though. They never gave me grief for it. They'd just say things like, "Hey, I heard you left Austin on the side of the road." He eventually made a full recovery, but I'll never forget that day. I honestly think it was one of the worst things I've ever done. Story 42. When I was about 10, there was this girl at school whose mom was a teacher there. The girl had a huge ego and treated everyone like she ran the place just because of her mom. One day during sports day, she was being awful to me. We were standing in line to get water. I was in front of her, and when I got my water, I accidentally tripped and spilled the water all over her. I made sure it looked completely realistic. She started crying and ran to her mom. Her mom came over to us and I explained, very apologetically, that it was an accident. Because I played it so well, other kids backed me up. The girl stormed off and her mom told me that her daughter was being silly and that she could tell it was an accident. I even got a few high fives from other kids and felt proud for standing up to someone who had been a bully to a lot of people. She calmed down a bit after that. I know this thread is about the worst things we've done, but honestly, I don't feel guilty about this one. Story 43. When I was 15 and my brother was 9, we were at a public swimming pool that had some really cool water slides. He kept standing up at the end of the slide right as I was coming down behind him. I warned him twice not to do that because someone could get hurt. Of course, the next time we went down, he did it again. As I passed him, I grabbed his leg to make a point. He immediately face-planted into the slide. When he stood up in the pool, I saw 2 white shapes fly into the water in front of him. He went under and stayed there for a moment too long. I got worried he was unconscious, so I grabbed him and threw him out of the pool. When he was out, blood was pouring from his mouth. I looked, and it was just a mess. It looked like his front teeth were gone. I dove under and found both teeth, grabbed them, and jumped out. Lifeguards had gathered because he was screaming and bleeding everywhere. We rushed him to a dentist and they tried to repair everything, but it didn't work very well. He now has 2 false front teeth. I still feel terrible about it. I know I'm not responsible for all of his dental issues, but it's hard not to feel like I caused it. He never complained during high school, but I know it couldn't have been easy. Story 44. When I was a freshman in high school, there was this senior who shared a couple of my classes. He was exactly what you'd expect when surrounded by underclassmen, cocky and full of himself. He had this habit of flaunting his money, especially after he started selling sodas to freshmen who weren't allowed off campus for lunch. For some reason, we weren't allowed to leave. He always carried this PSP with him. It was one of the things he bragged about constantly. One day he was being particularly annoying, and I noticed he left his backpack wide open with the PSP just sitting inside. So I did what seemed obvious at the time. I waited until he wasn't paying attention, then grabbed it and pocketed the PSP. It wasn't unusual for me to pickpocket my friends as a way to show them that the back pocket was a terrible place to leave a phone. But I always gave their stuff back. This wasn't one of those times. Instead, I sold the PSP to a friend of mine. Eventually, the guy I stole it from just bought a new one and moved on. I didn't feel bad at first, but after he graduated, I grew a conscience, and the guilt hit me. Story 45. I was in a long-term relationship with someone, but over time I became disillusioned. For one reason or another, and listening to the wrong people, I let others influence my decision to move in with a friend and break up with her. I broke up with her over instant message. It was only much later that I realized what a terrible thing that was to do. I apologized and we started talking again. I genuinely wanted to fix things and try again. But more stuff happened. Not all of it was my fault. There were family issues and other stress going on. Still, I caused us to grow distant again. I kept messing up over and over with no end in sight. Eventually, I recognized how awful that had made me. For a while, I tried to make up for it by doing things for other people. I went out of my way to help others, thinking maybe it would somehow redeem me. But in time, I realized that this is who I had become. While I still struggle to forgive myself for what I did to her, I also know that time moves on. People change. I may not be a better person now, but I don't think I'm a terrible one anymore either. Story 46. This is something I still can't get over, even though it happened 8 years ago. Right out of high school, I was working at a game store that was connected to a video rental place, back when those still existed. We used to get nonstop calls from one regular customer asking if certain games were in stock. He would call every day, sometimes multiple times, even though he never actually came in to buy anything. One game in particular that he kept calling about was Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. He'd ask every other day if it was out yet or if we had it used. Now this kid sounded like he was around 13 or 14, and it was pretty clear over the phone that he had some developmental challenges. As an impatient late teen dealing with his constant calls, I got frustrated. So one day I lied. I told him yes, we had the game in stock. What I didn't expect was for him to actually show up just a few minutes later. He came in, smiling, excited, and asked for the game I said we had. I stood behind the counter, frozen. I realized what I had done. I had to look him in the eyes and admit that the game wasn't actually out yet, that I had lied. His face just fell. He looked completely crushed, like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. My boss had seen the entire thing and pulled me aside. He scolded me, not just for lying to a customer, but for what I had done to that kid in particular. I felt awful for weeks. I still think about it sometimes, as a reminder of the kind of person I never want to be again. Story 47. I had this canoe I was going to sell. A guy texted me and we set up a meeting. He came over, I showed him the canoe, we negotiated the price, and the deal was done. He was driving a car with a small tent trailer behind it, clearly ready for a camping trip. I helped him lift the canoe onto the top of the tent trailer and let him tie it down. I wasn't going to be responsible if the thing flew off while he was driving. He pulled out what could only be described as string, not rope, to secure this 16-foot canoe. I asked if he had any ratchet straps. He didn't. He was also taking forever in my back alley, and cars were waiting to get by. I already had my money, so I started texting my buddy about this guy and how he was tying down the canoe, in a tone that wasn't exactly kind. All of a sudden, the guy in front of me pulled out his phone, looked at me and said, "You actually texted that to me." I froze. Oh no. To this day, I still feel bad whenever I think about it. Story 48. There are a bunch of things I could share, and the more I think about them, the more I realize I was kind of a terrible kid. I've worked hard to be better as an adult. It's a constant effort. When I was a kid, I once shot a squirrel with a BB gun. The shot must have hit its spine. It started dragging itself with just its front legs, trying to crawl away. I had to shoot it 5 or 6 more times before it died. I felt awful, and I still do. Later that same year, I made another awful decision and shot a crow. I hit it in the beak, basically tearing part of its face. I had to shoot it point blank to end it. That moment still haunts me, and I really hate that I ever did it. Years later, I started hunting. I've since become a very proficient shot with a rifle. While I haven't had the opportunity to harvest anything yet, I've made a personal rule to only take shots I'm fully confident in.